In the Second World War, Nazi Germany was defeated by an alliance led by the USA, the UK, and the Soviet Union. These wartime allies agreed that when the conflict ended, the western part of Germany would be occupied by the former two and by France. Meanwhile, the eastern part would be occupied by the Soviets. But it didn't take long for tensions to brew between the Soviet Union and the American led West. Stalin imposed his own version of a communist dictatorship on the eastern part of Germany and on the other countries which his armies had occupied during the war, like Poland and Czechoslovakia, rather than allowing them to choose their own systems of government. The rising tensions were summed up by the former British Prime Minister Winston Churchill in a 1946 speech that went viral.
From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. Behind that line lie all the capitals of the ancient states of Central and Eastern Europe.
3 years later, in 1949, Moscow detonated its first nuclear device, which was much sooner than anyone had expected. This started an arms race and led to the creation of NATO and its Soviet led rival known as the Warsaw Pact. The Cold War lasted for more than 4 decades. Even though American and Russian soldiers never actually clashed on the battlefield, there were still plenty of tense moments, like the Korean War, the construction of the Berlin Wall, and the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Cold War finally ended in 1989. It ended because the Soviet Union's economy could not keep up with America's. This meant Moscow could not justify spending so much money on weapons, not when its citizens were struggling. So, how exactly did geography come into the Cold War? For a start, geography can explain why the Soviet Union's leaders forced their system of government on East Germany and Eastern Europe. Russia has a long history of starvation. This has been caused by a combination of factors, like its long cold winters, which make the growing season short. Its huge size also makes moving large quantities of grain into the cities very difficult. In contrast, the rest of Eastern Europe, like Ukraine, Belarus, the Baltic states, Poland, Romania, and Hungary, all produce more grain than their citizens can eat. When you take this into account, it is easy to understand why Stalin imposed Soviet rule on Eastern Europe after the Second World War ended, even if it doesn't justify it. Russia's history of hunger meant Moscow desperately wanted to control the region's food supply, and the peace at the end of the Second World War gave it this chance. Geography can also explain why the USA wanted to stop the Soviet Union from conquering any more territory than it already had in 1945. The western part of Germany had direct access to the Atlantic and the option of targeting American shipping lanes. In contrast, all countries behind the famous Iron Curtain did not have direct access to the Atlantic Ocean. They did not present a naval threat to the USA in Soviet hands. Unfortunately, this geography meant the USA could tolerate the Soviet Union dominating Eastern Europe because these countries could only access the closed off Baltic or Black Seas. This all created a very tense situation, but ultimately, it was a situation which both the USA and the Soviet Union could live with. The only other red line for Washington concerned Soviet access into the Pacific Ocean because the Atlantic and Pacific were both of America's backyards. This explains why America so quickly forgave Japan at the end of the Second World War. and helped to rebuild the Japanese economy. The Sea of Japan blocks Russia's only ice-free Pacific port, Vladivostok, from having direct access into the ocean. The southern part of Korea is also useful to that end, but only the southern part. This might explain why America was only prepared to defend South Korea from communist domination. Geography can also explain why the USA rather than the Soviets won the Cold War. Unlike Russia, the USA had a large food surplus. This meant it could be generous to the key Cold War countries I mentioned, like Japan, South Korea, West Germany, and other West European countries, most of whom needed to import food to survive. The USA could offer them much better trade terms than the Soviet Union could. And their geographic locations, in between Russia and the open oceans, meant their allegiance was key to winning the Cold War. So what do you think? Did geography really win the Cold War? Or was it just about capitalism being a better system than communism? Feel free to leave a comment. And if you enjoyed this video and want to watch more like it, please subscribe to How Geography Creates History.